So we're starting a new series. That was like a slow hand clap, wasn't it? Truly, madly, deeply. We're going to be basing for the next few weeks around a fascinating book in the Bible called the Song of Songs. It's an incredible book. In fact, some have claimed it's the most incredible book in the Bible. It's only a short book, just 117 verses from beginning to end. It's a book that mystifies people, and so many people feel like they're reading a Mills and Boons novel and skip over because it's not for them. And yet consistently through history, this book has been so important. And I'm going to just spend a few moments unpacking why this book is important. And today will be a little bit of a foundation laying for us to understand why this book is important. We're going to get into a few verses of the book itself, but today is going to be largely about just preparing the way for us to understand what God might be wanting to say through this book. But before we look at it, this book is poetic, it's explicit, it tells of the experience of two lovers as they discover the beauty, the power, the agony, and the joy of human sexual love. I find it fascinating. This book is sandwiched between Solomon's sadness of Ecclesiastes, where everything is meaningless, it's all meaningless. And then the next book is Isaiah, where it promises a coming Messiah and the hopes of a nation and the hope of the world. And this book is sandwiched between the sadness of Ecclesiastes and the hope of Isaiah. The book is pretty much at the center of the Bible. Not exactly, but thereabout. The title, the Song of Songs, is taken from the first two words in the Hebrew text, which literally mean this: the greatest song of all. If you've got any of those albums at home, the greatest rock ballads ever, the greatest pop songs ever, the greatest 90s songs ever, well, this is the greatest song ever. And the way it's described as Song of Songs is a little bit like the distinction given to the Holy of Holies, or the King of Kings, or the Lord of Lords. It says this is not just a song, this is the Song of Songs. Stick that in your pipe and smoke it, Simon Cowell. Why is this book included in the Bible? Let me give you some reasons why it's a mystery that it would be included. There are no explicit religious themes in this book whatsoever. None of the usual customary reference to sacrifice or to ritual are mentioned anywhere in this book whatsoever. In fact, there's no reference to some of those messages of the gospel that we become accustomed to in the rest of the Bible. There's no mention of law or grace. There's no mention of sin or salvation. There's not even a mention of prayer. In fact, there's not one undisputable reference to the Lord God in this book. No reference to God. How is this book in the Bible? We have got someone who smuggled a Mills and Boons into the middle of the Bible. Yet, this book has been held in great significance, both in the Jewish custom and the Christian church. In the synagogues, this would have often been read on the 8th day of one of their greatest festivals, the Passover festival. They would have stood, and I can imagine some embarrassed young children being a part where it talks about her breasts being like doves. And the kids standing there all awkward thinking, Mummy, when is this finishing? But it was an important part of their custom. Many Christian writers have written on this book. In fact, you look back at the first 15 centuries of the church, nearly every major prominent Christian writer of the day took some time to address this book in particular. So, I believe this book has been divinely inserted into the canon. That's what we call the collection of the books that make up the Bible. But let's look a little bit more at it. How are we to read this unusual book? Is this a love manual? Is this a book for guys to try and learn how to romance their wives a bit better? Is this a book that's a fictitious story? What is this book? Well, for many years, this book was believed to be allegorical. In other words, fictitious, a made-up story that someone had constructed in order to convey a higher spiritual truth. For many years, it was believed that that was the case, but there's a number of problems with us understanding the book as an allegory. First one is, nothing in the text indicates that that was the author's intention. I think someone would have written in and said, oh, by the way, I've made this story up in order for you to understand a higher truth. That's not referenced or said anywhere in this text. Second problem with this understanding this book as allegorical is that there are numerous references to real people and places in this book, that they actually make historical sense. And the third problem is that there isn't really the characteristic narrative that exists in allegorical writing. There was an 18th century Anglican bishop who suggested that the book could actually be an actual story of a marriage between King Solomon and one of the daughters of the Pharaoh. And looking through, there are consistent references that would suggest that is the case. But it's more than that. As well as being an actual story, it has some typological meaning also. That means that there are people that we are introduced to in here that become a type of another story. So for example, King Solomon becomes a type of the King of Kings. The Gentile lover becomes the lovers of God. And we can understand this as a real story in a typological way. As we read this book, we will be fascinated by this couple who are profoundly in love. We will be inspired by their loving relationship and learn to apply them into our own relationships. And we will be stirred in our relationship with God to a new level of intimacy with Him. Let's look together. Are you ready? Are your palms a bit sweaty? Are you going to cope with this?
Yeah.
Just get a fan for a moment and get ready for what's to come. Oh, let Him kiss me with the kisses of His mouth. For your love is more delightful than wine. Pleasing is the fragrance of your perfumes. Your name is like perfume poured out. No wonder the young women love you. Take me away with you. Let us hurry. Let the King bring me into his chambers. Let's just stop there for a moment. There are water dispensers at the back. We live in a disconnected world. In fact, when a baby is born, it's been growing inside the mother's womb for 9 months, and then it's emerged into this world, and one of the very first things that happens is the umbilical cord is cut, removed, and one of the very first things that baby does is cry. introduced into a disconnected world. We know today that it's often recommended that there's skin time at that initial part, that the child has some comfort of connection with the mother, that skin to skin they bond in this disconnected world. I don't think it's accidental that the baby cries at that moment of disconnect. And life seems to go on disconnected. We have fragmented society. We have dysfunctional communities. We have segregated people groups. We have class structures. We have social divides. We have fearful border controls. We have broken families. We have abuse in cyberspace. We are disconnected. In fact, I don't believe it's accidental that some of the biggest trends in society today are trends that try to get us to connect. If you are on social media in any way, in one of the many forms of Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, Snapchat, pin post, whatever you call them, Pinterest, trying to get down with the kids now. That all of these things, what do they say you can do? They say you can connect. Why are they successful? Because people want to connect. In a disconnected world, they want to connect. Imagine, in fact, you don't have to imagine, just go back for some of you 10 years ago, somebody comes to you and says, do you know that you can post all your pictures and tell people what you're eating for breakfast and take a photograph of it and share it around the world? Are you excited about that? You'd say, shut up. Get away. Why would I want to do that? Can I just put a little mention? It doesn't matter how nice the meal looks on your plate when you take a photograph of it. It doesn't look very nice. Sorry. It doesn't make me hungry. But these trends also, now online dating, connecting people together. There's a desire for people to join up in a fragmented, disconnected world. And it's not a recent phenomenon. In fact, it started right at the very beginning of the roots of sin. Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden connected with God, connected with nature, connected with each other. And their one act of disobedience brought disconnection into their walk with God, into their relationship with nature, into their relationship with each other. There were 3 disconnections there. The garden, each other, and God. This book, Song of Songs, is a book of connection. It's a book of healing. It's a book that longs for that connection in our lives. A longing for human connection, a longing for sexual connection, and a longing for divine connection. One of the differences between us and animals is that we know that our lives are finite. We know, as soon as we come to the age of understanding, that one day our lives will pass from this earth. And we have a society that's fragmented, that's broken, that's disconnected, that knows its end is in sight. But along that journey, there are some pearls of grace and mystery that give us a longing into another reality and another world. Astronomers, they look to the sky with their telescopes. They look to the vastness. They keep building bigger telescopes. They keep seeing further, and they've not come to the end. There's something mysterious about the infinite nature of space that getting our head around gives us something of a glimpse of the mysteries of eternity, something of the grace of that journey in our mortal world of immortality. And there's a longing. It's a longing that's created a multi-billion-pound industry of people venturing in rockets and shuttles and space stations to try and venture and understand and learn. Scientists, they not using telescopes but microscopes. They keep breaking the atoms down. They keep finding new things. They keep splitting them. And they keep finding greater depths in the very smallest parts of our fabric of society. And there's a mystery. When will they come to the finite one little bit that's actually the smallest? That's the end of the road for our exploration. There's a longing to find the answers. There's students. You know, one of the things about education, if it works well, it teaches you that you don't know very much. Some of the most gifted PhD holders are people who understand they know a lot about one thing, but not a lot about a lot of things. We realize that learning seems to be a vast panacea that trying to get our head around feels mysterious. And yet the student longs to learn. Everyone's wanting to try and make sense of their existence on this earth. St. Augustine, one of the early fathers of the church, said this: our hearts are restless until they find their rest in thee. We can keep building bigger telescopes, keep building bigger microscopes, keep reading more books at the library, but there's a restlessness until we find God. But this restlessness is expressed not just in the sciences, but it's expressed in the popular culture of our age. Art, fashion, media, all longing to break free from the disconnect and to create connection. Think about brands, for example. Why do young people all want to look distinct and different by wearing the same brand? Why is that? It's because they want to belong. They want to connect. Why a fashion industry is trying to tell us this is unique, but you'll all be wearing it next year. Tell you what, I'm not getting into one of those see-through dresses. Why is one of the fastest, biggest selling commodities of recent years a telephone? Did you know you can actually use them to make calls as well? They're amazing. There's no lead on it or anything. You just phone people. It's incredible. But it's like in our pocket. And I've got to be honest, you know, I think I've confessed it before and I've not been healed of it yet. I am addicted to my phone. And I put that out there partly in a funny way, but partly in a real way as well. Pray for your pastor. But on my phone, I've got the Bible. It was the right answer to give first of all, wasn't it? Like, I've got news channels from around the world. I know what kicks the football players have deployed, the balls they've passed within seconds of them doing it, and I'm not even in the ground. I know. I saw the studio Graham built before I came in the building. I'm able to connect. And in our pockets, we carry those around because we desire to belong and to connect. There's a Russian artist called Jawlensky. He said this: art is an expression of longing for God. But even those who deny God long for connection. There's an atheist author called Julian Barnes. He said this: I don't believe in God, but I do miss him. There's a pervading sense in society that something is missing. In show business, they often say, you've got a great voice, you're a good-looking guy. Not talking about me. And they say, but have you got that X factor? That something extra? And in people's lives today, there's like something, not an X factor that's missing, but there is a gap, a hole, a void that pervades and exists and finds its expression in so many ways of the world. There's a pervading sense that something is missing, and I believe this can provide three types of responses. First is a hopeful quest for enlightenment. Some express that through spiritual means. Secondly, there's a pragmatic compensation with distractions. We fill the void with other things to take our mind off it. And the third is a disconcerted cynicism and negativity to the world. Become a critic of the world. This book, The Song of Songs, is a book about longing. It's a book about intimacy. And it's a book about connection. I'm going to ask another question before we delve into this. Is sexual language an appropriate way to express longing? That's a good question. Before some people write in and talk about how inappropriate it was, I wanted to give my reply before we get those letters. We live in a highly sexualized world. Have you noticed that? No? Where do you guys live? You've just come out of your prayer closet for the last 40 days, haven't you? We live in a highly sexualized world. We're surrounded by images. Guys, you might buy that nice car, but she will not marry you. That 6-foot model that advertises on the billboard with that car. She doesn't come as part of the deal. Conversations seem to be full of sexual innuendo. Entertainment in today's world seems to be so embroiled with sexualization that there doesn't seem to be any point in a watershed any longer.
That's right.
In fact, I think we've made this equation that because the world talks about sex all the time, therefore it's dirty. And so we've come to this conclusion. If talking about it all the time equals dirty, then never talking about it makes it clean. Let me give you an illustration. The whole world is full of people making cakes. Square cakes, round cakes, small cakes, big cakes, chocolate cakes, vanilla cakes, cream cakes, making cakes. But there's a fault with the recipe. And it means that there's a poison in the cake. So they make them, they are tempted by them, they eat them, but they have a reaction to them. A negative reaction. Would the appropriate response of the bakers be to say, the world is full of dirty cakes. Therefore, let's never mention cakes again. Let's not talk about cakes because they're dirty. No. A baker should make clean cakes. I don't know if you're with me. I don't know if you got a clue what I'm talking about. Some of you are still recovering from the opening 4 verses of the Song of Songs. The baker should make clean cakes, but not only make clean cakes, it should help other people to remove the poison from their cakes, and so they can also enjoy clean cakes. There's an analogy there if you're smart. What should the church's position be on sex? Traditionally, it's been don't. I want to make a statement that the church regarding sex should be more prophetic than prudish. Because God designed it. God made the recipe. God made the delights and the joy of sex. And we should not avoid the conversation. We should engage with the conversation. We should cast out a vision that isn't the church is against this, but the church celebrates. And the church knows the recipe without the poison. The church knows the freedom of being in a loving relationship as God has prescribed, a marriage relationship where two people are committed to each other, husband and wife, for the rest of their days, and they engage in the pleasures and the wonders of longing and intimacy that connects together in beautiful sex. I wonder if anybody will come next week. I've often found the two most popular subjects in church have been the end times and sex. Sometimes wondered about combining a super series on sex in the end times. The church is called to bake good cakes and help others to do the same. Not to avoid, not to sweep under the carpet, not to never mention, but to celebrate. You know, church, we should be inspiring our young people, not that sex is dirty and to be avoided, but the sex is to be celebrated at the right time. Yes. In the right way, it's celebrated and wonderful and beautiful. And you know, all the statistics will say that when couples do things God's way and they place intimacy and connection, because you see, that's what's going on in our world. People in a disconnected world are looking for connection. Yeah. That's why there's a sexual epidemic in society, because it's a counterfeit for intimacy. It's a counterfeit for connection. And God says that we can find intimacy and connection, and sex can be a wonderful joining together of that moment. But it can also be a counterfeit expression of a longing. The Bible is full of marriage and sexual metaphor. We read in the Old Testament of Hosea. We read that his wife was like a form of Israel, a dysfunctional bride who betrayed. But the Lord said he will allure her back to himself. Jesus described the kingdom of God like friends awaiting the arrival of the bridegroom. There's a marriage metaphor in there. And in marriage, consummation of intimacy happens when a couple comes together and they enjoy sex. Apostle Paul, he talked about a marriage metaphor as a union between Christ and his church. It said the husband and wife become one flesh. And he said, and I speak of Christ and his church. We are called not to be in our divided lives, in our disconnected lives, where occasionally we pray and say, God, would you come and just help me with this problem? God, would you come and just be a part of the solution to this? We're not called just to attend a church, be part of a club, sing some songs, read some scriptures. We're called to intimacy and connection with the Most High God. We are called to become one with Him. Yeah. John the Baptist said, I must become less, He must become more. The end of the scriptures, John reveals a revelation of the marriage supper of the Lamb. where at the end of time on this earth, the bride will be prepared and ready for the bridegroom to come, and there will be the wedding supper of the Lamb, and we will be joined together in unity and intimacy for the rest of eternity. An author, Eugene Peterson, who wrote a paraphrase of the Bible called The Message, said this when he was addressing this book, The Song of Songs. He said, "The ache in so many hearts is in fact a desire for intimacy. Sex becomes a parable for prayer." Ooh, that's just dealt with a few religious spirits. Prayer being the inner quest for intimacy with God, and sex the bodily expression of intimacy with a person. Spurgeon, a famous preacher many years ago in London, said this: "This song, the Song of Songs, occupies a sacred enclosure into which no one may enter unprepared." He said this: "Take off your shoes." I hope I've not got holes in these socks. Take off your shoes from your feet, for the place where you now stand is holy ground. Spurgeon goes on to describe that the historical books in the Bible are like the outer courts of the temple. Well, they're a part of the temple, but they're part of that story that surrounds. Talks about the Gospels and the epistles and the Psalms being like the holy place in the temple. But Spurgeon talked about this book being like the Holy of Holies, the most holy place. So as we take off our shoes in this Truly, Madly, Deeply series, we are thrust straight into the longing that I've just introduced. Let's look at them again. And I'm going to try and multitask right now. I'll put my shoes back on while I'm reading it without you noticing. Someone's saying, "You should have undone your laces. You're going to break your shoes doing that." Thank you. It says this: "Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth. For your love is more delightful than wine. Pleasing is the fragrance of your perfumes. Your name is like perfume poured out. No wonder the young women love you. Take me away with you. Let us hurry. Let the king bring me into his chamber." Famous song says it started with a kiss. Kissing on the lips is one of the most vulnerable and trust-inducing moments in a relationship. Kissing can unlock something. Kissing is incredibly intimate and powerful. It marks a seed moment in a relationship. So you can go to the cinema, you can have meals, you can hold hands, but when you kiss on the lips, no tongues allowed. I know you're Pentecostals. Someone's just got the interpretation. It's an expression of surrender, and it opens the door to one another. And the very first words we're introduced here, there's not a walking start into this. This is straight into the action. This is not, "Hi, my name is, and I'm in love, and let's hold hands, let's date, and then let's kiss." It's like straight in there. Because the book is about longing and about intimacy, and we're introduced at the very beginning. Let him kiss me. Let him kiss me. The Apostle Paul talks about this, but he uses a different form of expression. He says in Ephesians 3:19, he expresses a longing that you and I and he may be filled with all the fullness of God. It's the same thing as this lady who's expressing here. It's a kiss that allows the other person to be drawn into our world, that we may join, that we may give them permission from a surrendered perspective, that they come into our lives and into our world, and their fullness is manifest in us. Now there was somebody who went to a pastor once and said, I find it really freaky to imagine Jesus kissing us on the mouth. You're not supposed to imagine that. It's a metaphor. It's a metaphor, it's a picture, it's conveying a truth. That's why the way Paul puts it, that you might be full of the fullness of Christ in your life. And the kiss is the entry. It speaks of our surrender to the deep things of God. It marks the moment that we in our walk with God go beyond the casual hanging out together. Goes beyond the eating and feasting together. Goes beyond the occasional meetups on a Sunday. Goes beyond singing some love songs. This is the moment we wrap our arms around him and we say, come and let your fullness in me, O God. It's no longer I, but Christ who lives in me. It marks the moment that we open the door and go deeper. Some people over the years have tried to define what the kiss could mean. Some have said the kiss is like the moment that the incarnation took place, that God himself came and took on the form of human flesh, grew inside Mary's womb and emerged into the world. That was God's kiss to the world. Others have said the kiss of God is like the words of life that Jesus brought while on the earth. That the kiss of God was his release to that woman who was caught in the act of adultery. And he said, where are your accusers gone? Therefore I do not accuse you. Go and sin no more. That Jesus' words were like a kiss to that woman. Some have said the kiss of God is like the death and resurrection of Christ. That he died on that cross to give his life for you and for I. And he rose triumphantly from the grave. And he kissed the guilty world in love. Some have said the kiss is like the infilling of the Holy Spirit that comes as a seal guaranteeing our inheritance in the faith, filling us with his power. The kiss of God came on the New Testament church and filled them with power in the upper room. And they went to the face of the earth with the good news of the gospel. And today we know that same power. This was an intoxicating love. Your love is more delightful than wine. It was all consuming. It was deliriously overpowering. She said, I want to get close to you. I want to smell what aftershave you're wearing. I want to know your scent. I want to understand the intimate things that you only get from being close with God. Have you ever smelled God's scent? Have you ever been close enough? Have you ever drawn deeper into him to know his aroma around your life? You see, you get close enough, it rubs off. Your scent becomes his scent. You walk down the street and people experience the scent of Christ because it's all over you. Why? Because you've been with Jesus. Said his aroma, his name is like perfume poured out. She said, take me away with you. Let us hurry. Let the king bring me into his chamber. In this disconnected world, this lover said, I know I will find my connectivity, my intimacy when I'm alone with you. Just in conclusion this morning, in this introduction to the series over the coming weeks, will you draw close to God? Will you allow his intimate embrace to fulfill your longings? Will you recognize your misaligned longings? Those parts of your life that you've compensated true intimacy with a counterfeit replacement? Will you completely desire after God?